up. My name is Miguel Escobar, and I serve as Managing Program Director of Leadership Resources at the Episcopal Church Foundation. We want to welcome you to Vestry Orientation, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend tonight's event. I just want to begin with a few words about what the Episcopal Church Foundation is. ECF is an independent, lay-led organization founded in 1949, and our mission is to strengthen the Episcopal Church through three areas: vision and planning, leadership development, and raising financial resources for ministry. Clearly, our focus is on sort of the operational heart of the church. Through our various programs, we have four areas that we're really focusing on. We want to see lay and clergy leaders working together. We want to see healthy, vital, vibrant Episcopal communities of faith. We want there to be meaningful opportunities for Christian stewardship and effective fundraising, and for innovation to be present throughout the church. We have a wide variety of programs, including ECF Vital Practices, Vestry Resource Guide, capital campaigns, endowment management. But one of the most important things that we do is what we're doing right now, which is we provide very oftentimes free or low-cost webinars and workshops on a wide variety of issues that that congregations are facing today. So again, thank you for joining us. My name, as I said, is Miguel Escobar. And I'm joining from New York. The Episcopal Church Foundation is located in New York. I'm joining from my home office this evening, as is my colleague Brendan. I'm a member of Grace Episcopal Church in Brooklyn Heights. And Brendan, perhaps you can just share a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thank you. Again, everyone, my name is Brendan Hunter. I'm an Associate Program Director at the Episcopal Church Foundation, working with our publication, ECF Vital Practices, which I hope you'll check out if you are not already familiar with that, our Fellowship Partners Program, and on ECF's events and partnerships. My background is in parish ministry and young adult and campus ministries. Prior to that, I've a variety of experience of working with vestries in different capacities, and really excited to be able to join you in this hour about orienting folks to the vestry. So look forward to your questions and comments.
Great, thank you. Let's begin with prayer. Disturb us, Lord, when we are too well pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we have dreamed too little, when we arrived safely because we sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, when with the abundance of things we possess, we have lost our thirst for the waters of life. Having fallen in love with life, we have ceased to dream of eternity, and in our efforts to build a new earth, we have allowed our vision of the new heaven to dim. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture on wider seas, where storms will show your mastery, where losing sight of land we shall find the stars. We ask you to push back the horizons of our hopes and to push into the future in strength, courage, hope, and love. Amen.
Amen.
Well, this presentation is a presentation in four parts. We're going to begin by discussing the role of the vestry and what ECF sees particularly as the role of the vestry, which includes the canonical role of the vestry. We will then move to a lengthier discussion of the key vestry responsibilities that vestries have. We will then move to practical tools and resources for new vestry leaders that people can have in their back pockets throughout the year. And then finally, we will wrap it all up by discussing some practical next steps that you can take from this vestry, some of the ideas, and start to implement over the course of the next few months. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Brendan.
Thank you, Miguel. So to start, just want to look at the topic of, well, what is a vestry? And often to know what we are now, it's very helpful to take a look back from where we come from. Maybe wondering why then there is an image and an armoire on the screen. Giving a very brief overview and history of what vestries, and again I emphasize very brief and broad. Looking back at the Church of England, the annual election of church wardens took place during Easter week, and it was a simple process. All adult, land-owning male parishioners would crowd into the room where the clergy would be robing, this room called the vestry, vesting, to hear the accounts of the past church wardens and to elect their successors. Skipping ahead and skipping across the ocean in our own Episcopal Church history, specifically in Virginia, parishes had become so large that it was impossible to crowd all of the voting members into the robing room. And so they developed the practice of electing 12 representatives for life. So just want to emphasize that for those of you who have served for quite a while. It was for life at that point in time, and while I know that 3 years can sometimes seem like a long time, we're very thankful that it is not a life appointment. We're also thankful now that we've expanded our understanding of who can have voice and vote on a vestry. It's not just adult landowning male members. Of course, we have women and men, and depending upon your diocesan canons, sometimes there can be youth on the vestry. And I hope in many places, young adults on your vestry. Specifically with youth on the vestry, for those of you who are not familiar with that, certain dioceses have provisions that allow for this. Sometimes it's just voice and no vote, or in some cases there might actually be a possibility to have both voice and vote. So check on that and see if that might be something to consider. So what is the typical vestry in the Episcopal Church today? Nowadays, vestries are usually elected during the annual parish meeting. Some of you may have just had your annual meeting this last Sunday. Many are having theirs this coming Sunday. But there are some that will hold their annual meetings at other points of the calendar year. I'm familiar with some that hold theirs in the spring. Some have moved theirs to the late fall or even in December. There are a variety of sizes of vestries, but it's fairly common for vestries to range in sizes between 6 to 12 members, depending upon the size of their parish and also depending on the canons of their diocese. One practice we at ECF have seen more often now is among smaller congregations to trim the size of their vestry so as to make it easier to find new vestry members and not to have the situation where an entire third of the congregation is having to serve at the vestry at any given point in time. Whatever the size of your vestry, in all cases, vestries do serve as the legal representative of the body of the parish regarding all matters pertaining to its corporate property. The general makeup of the vestry has to have the rector or, in the mission congregation, priest in charge or vicar, who is the presiding officer of the vestry, which is not to say that they necessarily have to lead all vestry meetings. The former bishop, of Texas, Claude Payne, advises rectors to consider training their senior wardens or another member of the vestry, a trusted member of the vestry, to facilitate regularly at meetings. In Bishop Payne's own words, this allows rectors to focus on the matter at hand rather than how well the meeting is being run. This also allows the rector to be able to note body language more and to be able to intervene sometimes if necessary. There are typically 2 wardens on a vestry. Many congregations, this is the senior warden and junior warden. If you have a bishop's committee, which is is the lead representative body in a mission congregation, that may be the bishop's warden and the people's warden. Regardless, that these are the source of support for the rector or priest in charge throughout his or her ministry. In many congregations, the junior warden has a special responsibility over properties and buildings, but this is not necessarily the case universally, and this can vary depending upon the tradition of your congregation. Some vestries will also elect a treasurer and or a secretary or clerk. This may be a person who is a voting member of the vestry, or could be somebody who is appointed to the vestry and does not have a vote. So these are some very basic principles that are common in most Episcopal church vestries. But what is it exactly that vestries do? The Episcopal Church Foundation sees the role of the vestry in 4 parts. While there is oftentimes almost an exclusive emphasis on the stewardship of a congregation's property and finances, we at ECF believe that vestries hold a key role first in discerning how God is calling your community of faith to live out the gospel in this place and in this time. Second, lay members of the vestry working with their clergy to articulate a shared mission, vision, and strategic plan for the congregation that responds to God's call. Third, that vestries have an important role in identifying new leaders for both the congregation and the wider church. We'll speak a little bit more about this in just a moment. And then finally, vestries are the legal representatives of the congregation for all matters that do pertain to the corporate property, and thus do have special responsibilities related to the property, the finance, human resources, etc., such legal matters of the congregation. We'll be exploring each of these areas in a little bit more detail in a bit, and Miguel will be talking more about that. But at this moment, I just want to take a quick step back and look at the canons that we have in our church that affect you as vestry members. So, as you'll see, one of the very interesting and perhaps somewhat quirky aspects of the church-wide canons pertaining to vestries is actually that they have very little to say about the purpose and organization of a parish vestry. You'll see, broadly speaking, that the first 2 bullet points relate to making sure that a congregation is being good stewards of their property and finances, whereas the second 2 relate to identifying religious leadership. Vestries do play a particularly important role during times of clergy transition and in nominating people for holy orders. In the prior slide, I did outline that what ECF sees as the 4 main responsibilities, and these canons offer more detail about the latter 2, specifically with new leadership and stewarding resources. What we see missing, though, at ECF from this description is the important role that vestries have in discerning God's call to the congregation and developing a mission and vision and strategic plan in response to this call. More and more, we believe that vestries are called to partner with their clergy in leading the congregation in this complex and, quite frankly, rather challenging time. And these are indeed challenging times for many Episcopal congregations. In January of 2014, ECF completed a series of surveys asking Episcopal congregational leaders to identify those areas that they needed the most help in currently and looking 6 months down the road. Not surprisingly, one of the topics that people most felt the need for help in immediately was stewardship, and vision and planning was by and far the most important when vestries were considering looking down the road 6 months and beyond. I will want to note for you, though, that we think it's interesting that both of these areas hinge on what ECF considers the strategic role of the vestry, namely in that identifying of a hopeful vision of the future, which can really rally a congregation and generate its gifts of time, talent, and treasure. When we take into account our wider civic and cultural landscape, the importance of the vestry as a strategic thinking leadership body within the church only becomes more important. Today, Episcopal congregations are faced with many external forces that are requiring local congregations to reimagine their role and take risks in very important ways. You'll get a copy of the slides. You'll be able to download that, but just want to highlight a few of these things for you. The average Sunday attendance in most Episcopal congregations has declined significantly. Attendance is now an average of 60 people. That's was in the latest statistics released in 2014. An increased reliance and necessity for effective lay leadership at the congregation and diocesan levels. There are more and more congregations with just part-time clergy, quarter-time clergy, or no regular clergy person at all. The significant increase in Latino, Asian American, and other ethnic or multicultural congregations and communities. And the significant generational differences in giving and patterns of giving and stewardship in terms of even giving of time, particularly amongst Generation X and millennials. There are definitely significant differences that have been studied, seen, and reported on, and would encourage you to explore those if you're not familiar with those already. So that's been a lot of information. Just want to take a brief moment to pause and see if there are any questions that you have, comments. For those of you who have served on the vestry for a long time, is this adding up to your knowledge of the important facts and of being on a vestry member? We'll probably move on. If there's a question that's popping into your mind, I just encourage you to take advantage of the chat box. If you're thinking that, it's probably likely that at least one or two other people are thinking the same question as well. So please don't be shy about doing that. Again, would encourage you to make sure that you're putting this on that says yes, so that's great. Always good to hear. Thank you. Nice to be able to get a response out there. So again, we'll go ahead and press on, but please take advantage of the chat box, and would encourage you to interject as well if you have any other comments or thoughts.
Well, thank you, Brendan. What we'd like to do now is dig in a bit deeper into the key vestry responsibilities, beginning with the idea that the vestry has an important role in discerning God's mission and vision for the congregation today. Just a moment ago, Brendan mentioned the surveys that we conducted through 2013. And one of the things that we discovered was that many congregations are indeed struggling with questions of purpose. What does it mean to be an Episcopal congregation today? Who is God calling your local congregation to be? As tempting as it might be to reach or provide ready-made answers, many congregations are realizing that it's at the vestry level that they are going to need to wrestle with these questions and come to answer them themselves. Each Episcopal congregation is different, and each will have their own unique way of responding to God's call. So what we can do is suggest some ways of getting to the why. On the right-hand side of the slide, there is a cartoon of a first-time vestry member surprised to see Jesus and Bible study at the top of the vestry meeting agenda. The caption reads, "First-time vestry member suddenly realizes tonight's vestry meeting was going to be about more than just the budget." It is about more than just the budget. We strongly believe that vestries need to understand their role as faith leaders of the congregation, holding the Bible in one hand and the annual operating budget in the other. And one way that Episcopal congregations are doing this is by placing faith formation at the top of the agenda. Oftentimes, this takes the form of a Bible study or a period of prayer and reflection and conversation. So that's one simple change, is simply restructuring the agenda slightly. A more structural change to the vestry itself that some program-sized congregations are exploring includes forming a property and finance committee that is overseen by the vestry. The purpose of this committee is to make recommendations to the vestry about many of the day-to-day operational issues affecting the life of the congregation. And what this does is it frees up the vestry itself to focus more of their time on discussing strategic, bigger picture, future-oriented issues, exploring and exploring these in light of God's call to the congregation today. Very closely tied to this, second key vestry responsibility is the ongoing discussion and development of a congregational mission and vision. ECF defines a congregational mission as a simple operational description of what it is that God has called the congregation to do. You may already have a mission statement in place, especially now as new members, vestry members are joining. This is a really important document to re-engage and show new vestry members and to expand upon as you plan for the coming year. A second part of this is the congregational vision, and ECF defines congregational vision as a hopeful picture of what the church and world looks like once your mission has been fully realized. It's intended to be a picture of the transformation of the congregation and neighborhood that is to come. So I know that we've been asking you to type your questions in the chat box, but right now I have a question for all of you, and I'd love to hear your responses in the chat box as we proceed along with the presentation. So if your congregation already has a mission and vision, what I'd like to know is how is your vestry familiarizing itself with these two core statements at this point in the year? Okay. So as you type, I'm going to go on and we'll be able to look at those in just a moment.
And now we're muted. Okay.
So another key responsibility of the vestry is the identification of new leaders, and specifically the next generation of leaders. Just a few weeks ago, ECF held a webinar on senior warden ministry, and it was noted that senior wardens have a special responsibility to be constantly surveying the congregation and identifying future vestry members, committee leaders, and yes, perhaps even those who have a call to the priesthood. So I know there are a few new senior wardens in the mix here attending, so that's something to just bear in mind. But what do we mean by identifying the next generation of leadership for the church? Vestries have an important canonical role during times of clergy transition. They have a role in electing the new rectors, as well as identifying postulants for holy orders. But in addition to these canonical responsibilities, vestry members, and perhaps the wardens especially, have the additional responsibility of identifying people who have leadership potential for the wider congregation. How are vestry members joining with the clergy to keep an eye out for individuals who can serve the congregation in a new way? Of course, many of you have just completed the nomination and election process. While these processes differ from parish to parish and diocese to diocese, what we want to emphasize here is that it's really critical for vestries to take a proactive role in identifying potential new members for the vestry throughout the year. Deliberate nomination processes take into account the extent to which someone is really excited about the mission and vision of the congregation. It engages people's gifts, skills, and passions, and it also gives people time to consider whether vestry service is actually a good fit. Final point, final third, I guess, points is borrowing from the world of community organizing. There are a lot of tools around doing one-on-one interviews, learning to be proactive about searching for people with significant leadership potential. There's also an old adage that comes from community organizing, which I think is helpful. It says, do you want something done? Ask a busy person. people who are heavily involved in community activities are oftentimes, but not always, but they're oftentimes folks who follow through on their commitments, and you want to plant the seed early about the possibility of them serving in either the coming year or down the road. Okay, great. I thank you for your responses in the chat box. I'm seeing that people are saying it was part of our retreat, developing a vision statement. This is a goal for this year is to rewrite the mission and vision statement. That's great. So, you know, it looks like this is a good reminder of the importance of mission and vision statements, and also just how critical it is, especially when orienting new Vestry members, to let them know about or to discuss mission and vision as a way of orienting them again to the role of the congregation. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So finally, in no way do we come to property and finance, which is oftentimes what many people think are the primary responsibilities of a vestry. Vestries are required to be good stewards of property and resources, creating financially sustainable, vital congregations. These legal and canonical responsibilities are very important, and they need to be understood in the context of a congregation's broader mission and vision. That's why we place mission and vision first. Property, money, staff, these are all resources for living out that mission and vision. So we could, and ECF oftentimes does, spend an entire webinar discussing what is just on this page. A few highlights. Vestries have the fiduciary responsibility to ensure that proper asset and financial management and oversight is taking place, and this oftentimes is done through an annual audit. One of the issues that vestries have to address is income streams. Using rentable space as a source of income, annual stewardship being critical. Vestries need to make sure that these annual stewardship campaigns are well planned and successful. Vestries oftentimes are directly involved in planning the periodic capital campaigns, whether for building maintenance or debt reduction. These are really critical for the ongoing life of the congregation. And whether you're small or a large congregation, it's also important to consider creating a planned giving program to begin or grow your endowment. So all of this has to come down to, all of this is ways of approaching the question of, income streams and for the life of your congregation. Another issue that vestries have to consider, and is really critical, is the matter of governance and liability. Vestries are the legal boards and directors of congregations. A lot of what that means is spelled out not only by the canons, but also by state law. There are ecclesiastical requirements, such as safe church training, which vestries need to make sure their congregations are in compliance with, and I would suggest you are in touch with your diocese to figure out what those requirements are specifically for you. There are also issues of legal liability for things like the possibility of accidents around church property. Do vestry members have director's insurance? So again, the term governance and liability covers a wide range of issues, and these matters need to be on the vestry's radar throughout the year and discussed, whether by the whole vestry or between the clergy and senior warden particularly. Okay. This last slide isn't so much about a canonical or organizational responsibility, but rather it's about the main way that most vestries get their work done, which is meetings. As we all know, meetings can be really great, productive experiences, or they can be pretty rough. So it's definitely worth our while to take a moment to think about how we can improve the quality of our meetings over the course of the year. One of the most important tools for ensuring vestry meetings, effective vestry meetings throughout the year is the establishment of something called a vestry covenant, or ground rules, they're also called, for how the vestry will work together. This is oftentimes done during vestry orientation, so around now, or perhaps during a retreat at the beginning of the year. Example rules will include, or example norms will include, we expect to start on time. We expect people to be at a vestry meeting, at all vestry meetings. We expect people to listen with an open mind. We expect people to disagree in an appropriate and Christian way. What I want to show you now is actually an example of a vestry covenant or ground rules, because I think it's a really excellent example. So let me switch screens here. And you should, just a moment, you should see this vestry covenant. You can Google it. It's St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Ayer, Massachusetts, and it's their 2007 vestry covenant, which I think is still active. But what I like about this vestry covenant is that there are two parts to it. There's part one, we will support one another by. And as you can see, there are just some named ways in which the vestry is going to be working together using I statements, supporting decisions agreed upon by the vestry. I'll note that just a little bit further down, there's some agreement around limiting vestry meetings to 2 hours, using email selectively. So clearly this vestry has come together and discussed the norms by which they're going to work together over the course of the year. But what I also love is that there's this part one in which they talk about norms for working together in the meeting, among the vestry. But then also they have a part two, which is how the vestry will be an example to the congregation. They will be, by creating a positive environment, warmly welcoming all parishioners at vestry meetings. They will ensure that the minutes are as transparent as possible, etc. So there, and you can see that this has been adopted year after year. So this is a great example of a vestry covenant that congregations have used. Let me switch back. To the document, the slide. Great. So in addition to holding vestry or to having a vestry covenant, there are a variety of other points, and we've already spoken about two of them. While the clergy is always the presiding officer, this doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be the meeting facilitator. Indeed, in typical parliamentary procedure, if the rector or a clergy person wants to take on the role of facilitator for a particular meeting, the appointed meeting chair can hand over the gavel for that session. So there's a wide variety of ways of having a meeting facilitator, but also at critical moments becoming the meeting facilitator. And so I think it's a nice opportunity to explore a variety of ways. And then the last points, again, have to do with what we prioritize on the agenda. Just like that cartoon indicated, we want to make sure that Bible study and prayer are at the top of the agenda. We also want to make sure that that there is time to discuss the really strategic questions, and then therefore perhaps use something like a consent agenda to review reports in advance and simply at the vestry meeting approve them together. Okay. So any questions? I see that there is a question about that covenant. Here's actually the link, if you'd like.
So again, if you have any questions at this time, we welcome you to type those into the chat box at this moment. Again, in any comments as well, we definitely welcome you to do that. Okay, we got a question coming in there. Sometimes it takes a little while to get things typing, but again, if we have something that pops up in your mind as we continue on, we'll be also spending a little bit of time for discussion at the very end to make sure that anything that may be lingering gets addressed. I'd also be curious if any of you, especially those of you who served on the vestry for a while, have had covenants and would have anything you would like to share about that and how you use that in the life of your vestry. Oh, and Eleanor has asked, how long do you recommend the Bible study spiritual portion of the vestry meeting take? Good question. That really depends upon the amount of time that your vestry is meeting and the comfort level that your vestry really has with this. If your vestry hasn't had a practice, a spiritual component to your vestry meeting beyond, say, even just an opening prayer or even nothing at all, spending a bit of time on that may make a bit more sense, along the lines of maybe just 5 or 10 minutes to start breaking people into this and getting them used to this idea. But I know that many vestries will spend upwards of a half an hour of spending time on that Bible study component, again, framing this around the conversation of being called as leaders and looking to where the congregation is being called to do, so that it is discussing very important and pressing matters. For those of you who are working on your mission and vision statement, that's a really good chunk of time and a really meaningful way to be talking about that bigger picture issue of what is our mission, what is our vision for our congregation.
And if I could just add there, I think that's the critical piece is the extent to which the Bible study has anything to do with the strategic issues being discussed. The more that they're connected, the more it makes sense to spend that time going deeper there. I would say for our own regular meetings here at ECF, if it's more of a sort of opening to the week, say, it's 10 to 15 minutes. But when it's really more closely connected to the matters at hand that need to be discussed, 30 minutes is very appropriate. So.
And it looks like some folks are sharing that do have that. It's around the 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so. So maybe for those of you, especially those who are needing to look at your mission and vision again, maybe consider trying to bump up that time a bit and use that as a framework, and again, coming up with some key questions about your congregation's mission and vision. Okay. So again, please feel free to keep typing those questions or comments into the chat box. But I'd like to just take a moment to share some tools and resources to recommend for you. And we'll kick that off by just giving you a recommended toolbox, so to speak, for all vestry members, and particularly those who are going to be new to your vestry. Just tipping down the list, the canons of the Episcopal Church, and for your diocese, again, your parish may also have particular bylaws. If you don't have your bylaws, maybe you should be looking into doing that. If you don't know where to start with that, you can contact your diocese. Many dioceses have their canons posted, and you can download, or they can probably send you an electronic copy of those. And if you do have your bylaws, taking a look at that. Relevant state and corporation laws for nonprofits is something that could be helpful when looking in relation to why some of those rules are set up. your mission statements, not just for your congregation, but also for your diocese or maybe your province as well. Taking a look at history, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, it's so helpful sometimes to be able to take a look back to understand where we've journeyed, where that path has led us to this present time and place, to give that context that can be so enlightening and helpful to understand certain patterns and behaviors and why your vestry is the way it is now, and where your congregation is now. And similarly, with your local community, particularly any demographics or trends for really being able to understand what is happening around you beyond your church. And finally, having those two wonderful, wonderful handy books next to you, the Book of Common Prayer, of course, for many of our staples for our worship, and also which I always espouse, particularly in this webinar, for having the Bible with you, and implore to each and every one of you that as a leader in the church that it is absolutely imperative that you read the Bible, and to do that as often as you can in all your meetings, in vestry meetings, budget meetings, in buildings and grounds meetings, that reading the Bible it is not an option. It is an absolute essential in your daily life and work. I also like to point out to you the Vestry Resource Guide, which is a publication of ECS and distributed by our partner Forward Movement. It was just recently revised and updated and released just this past summer, in July to be exact, and it has great stuff specifically for vestries looking to work as well-functioning lay clergy teams, including great stuff on mission and vision for those of you who are going to be working on that, and also at that strategy question and trying to help with that visioning process, plus some other great resources, including some other job descriptions for those of you who need to tweak that, working on a covenant. There's also an example commissioning service and some other great things in the appendix as well. Links up there, you can get that in the slides too, to be able to get that from Forward Movement, or check out your favorite Episcopal bookseller or other retailer. Great, we see some folks have already gotten their copies of the VRG. Awesome. Particularly for those of you who are working in as a treasurer in financial areas, those of you who are wardens, of course, but also as in administrative matters. I can speak from when I was working with my rector in my last position in a congregation, and we're trying to clean out the parish office, which had files dating back to the 50s and 60s. So we were trying to trudge through about 50, 60 years worth of files that had accumulated. For checking out the Manual of Business Methods in Church Affairs. This covers in a great detail of the financial practices, but also things in terms of the insurance that you should be looking to have in terms of, well, what do we need to cover ourselves in terms of liability? But then also, as I was mentioning, in terms of that record-keeping aspect, that's included. Record retention recommendations are in there, and I absolutely, that was a godsend for me when I was in parish ministry, to keeping a sane filing system in an office. I'd also encourage everyone to check out the Episcopal Church has a web Office of Research and has a great section on the Episcopal Church website for the Office of Research, telling your congregation and community. It's the specific name of that page. On there are two different reports that I particularly like to encourage you to check out. One of them is your parish report. That information is gleaned from the parochial reports that you are required to file every single year and are sure coming due very soon for most places in your diocese, but also nationally. The deadline's also coming up. So you can actually go back and take a look at that. I would say that this is a barometer more than anything. This isn't going to say if things are good or bad, but again, these are indicators. These are things to be able to get a sense of where are we at, where are we going. And the information on there includes your membership, total baptized members, your average Sunday attendance, as well as your pledge and plate over the most recent 11 years. The information right now is available through 2014. That's typically updated in the fall, so I would expect 2015 information to be available later on this year, probably around November or so. There are also community profiles that are available, which is provided for free for every congregation in the Episcopal Church. And that provides 12 demographic trends with a 3-mile radius of your congregation. Now again, a barometer. Some congregations will find this more helpful than others, but this is free information with a bunch of different statistics. Check it out and see what may have some interesting points to be able to help you out in your ministry. So I'd like to switch over to having our Miguel to walk us through some potential next steps, but would also again encourage you to share any questions that you may have as well, as we are about going to be wrapping up soon. So I want to make sure that if you do have any specific questions, if you are new to your vestry, so please let us know.
Thank you. So we shared a lot of information, and now it's about how do we translate that information into next steps. So here, again, are just a few, we have actually 2 slides of ways in which you can take these ideas and put them into practice, including researching diocesan canons to see if you can be elected to serve on your vestry, really broadening the who's on the vestry. Looking at the size of the vestry, again, asking whether or not it's the best fit, most efficient fit for your vestry. Some congregations are making them smaller, recognizing that the traditional 12-member vestry may not necessarily be the most efficient. Incidentally, from the field of leadership study, one of the things that's becoming sort of a truism is that teams should be capped around 9 or 10 people. So might make sense to see and sort of about that as well. Again, if you're a clergy, consider whether or not you need to preside at vestry meetings. Not all clergy will be comfortable with not presiding, but there may be a strong meeting facilitator among the group, and this would be a great way of improving the quality of vestry meetings as well. Always review canonical requirements and liabilities associated with being a vestry member. Do you have appropriate insurance? Was one of the questions, and I think Brendan pointed out the Manual of Business Methods can help you discern that. And over time, with the focus of vestry meetings towards discernment of God's mission and vision and the strategic issues affecting the life of the congregation, make sure that there's space on the agenda for those at the very top, and spend perhaps a little bit less time reviewing reports, maybe do that over the course of email in advance, and simply approve or discuss if there is a disagreement about this report. Moving into the next one, the second bullet point, we didn't get a chance to mention this, but there's a recording of the basics of parish finances, another ECF webinar, which was done once in 2014, only once, but it is absolutely excellent. And it is, in fact, one of the most watched webinars that we've ever done. And it is a 1-hour overview of just the basics, as the name suggests, the basics of parish finances. Gives you an outline of sort of ways to think about whether your finances are in a good state. So I can't recommend that enough, and thank you, Brendan, for putting that the link to that in the chat box. Let's see. You just walked through this, through the vestry, through the nomination election processes, but again, tying to the critical responsibility of identifying the next generation of leadership, the next iteration of leadership in your congregation. Really think about whether or not those processes are deliberate and open enough for people to discern whether or not they'd like to serve in this capacity. And then think also about how you're onboarding or orienting people to this important role in the congregation. Finally, Brendan shared a lot of information about building a toolbox. I hope you can go through those slides. Brendan, I'm wondering if you could also share in the chat box the Bob Shore's article on consent agendas. Consent agendas are a type of, well, agenda, but that uses emailing reports in advance to really shorten the amount of time spent on approving typically reports. It's a particular method, and that oftentimes frees up vestries significantly to have more robust conversations as well.
And if you click through onto that link as well, definitely check out on the right-hand column. There are a bunch of related resources as well, including an example consent agenda template that Bob also shared too. So there's a link to that under the related content if you go into that article.
And so that brings us to the end of our Vestry Orientation presentation. But there are a number of upcoming webinars for further learning, and especially for vestries. I want to point out the February 16th webinar, Making the Most of Your Vestry Retreat. We have a wonderful presenter, Nathan Kirkpatrick of Duke Divinity School, who leads a lot of vestry retreats and helps congregations also think about vestry retreats. I just finished doing a dress rehearsal with him, and it's a really wonderful webinar. So if you are thinking about doing a vestry retreat or would like to plan better vestry retreats, I strongly suggest registering for that one in the future. Finally, in just a few moments, you'll be receiving an email from ECF with a link to a survey. And we always love to hear your feedback on what worked for you and what didn't quite work for you in our webinars. So please do take a moment to fill that out and let us know. Brendan and we ended just a little bit early. So Brendan and I are going to stay on until 8 just to field any questions that you might have. So please let us know if you have any questions. And if not, we will thank you for attending. And we hope that you will join us for another webinar soon.